Genesis was a console that always enjoyed focusing in on the action. It was constantly pushing out games that were heavy on explosions and speed, and later on the adventuring side of things. But that's not to say Genesis only had action games, because it had a lot of other great games, even if they were overshadowed by the more popular genres on the system. One of those overshadowed games was Light Crusader. This game was developed by Treasure, who's mainly known for the work on games such as Gunstar Heroes and Ikaruga. It was pretty strange that Treasure would create such a different game considering their history on the Genesis, but I'm grateful they strayed from the action and tried something different. Light Crusader begins with a cutscene that introduces David and explains why he's headed to Greenrow. When you finally arrive, the king tells you how everyone from the town has been disappearing and asks you to search for the missing people. Upon taking over David, the player is presented with their first puzzle. They must find their first dungeon, which is where the whole game of Light Crusader takes place. But finding the dungeon is only the first of many puzzles in the game. Light Crusader is a very puzzle-heavy game, and the challenge ranges from pushing a block onto a tile all the way to some pretty complex stuff. Light Crusader doesn't stop at puzzles though, it's got platforming too. Platforming can be a little tricky though. Moving through 3 dimensions with no camera control makes jumping from one platform to another a little tedious at first. When using an isometric viewpoint, it's hard to tell when things are elevated, but Light Crusader gives everything shadows to help decipher what's on the ground and what's not. The game was created around these mechanics, knowing the limitations of them, so it never gets too convoluted. The viewpoint in this game can be a deal breaker for a lot of people, but you eventually get the hang of it with enough practice. Another important aspect of Light Crusader is the combat, which is pretty straightforward. The game features a tight control set with a normal standing sword attack and 2 jumping sword attack. The jumping attacks do a little more damage than the standing attack, but it's harder to aim them properly. There's also a magic system in place that's a little reminiscent of Gunstar Heroes. You've got 4 elements at your disposal: earth, water, fire, and wind. Every element can be combined with the others, and you can combine more than 2 elements at once. So it's possible to make over 15 types of magic spells in this game. The magic system had huge potential, but the game hardly utilized it properly. There are no segments in the game that actually require magic, and although there's 1 or 2 parts in the game where magic definitely helps you, they're few and far between. It would have been nice to see a major need for magic, or puzzles that required it, so it didn't feel like such a tacked down feature. But chances are, unless you're desperate, you'll stick with the sword for the majority of the game. When taking damage, there's a system for healing you too. You can pick up food or buy food and potions that can be set to automatically be used if your health gets low. Unfortunately, I think there's too much food in the game, making it a little too easy. While playing, I was constantly being healed, and not once did I go out searching for food or buy any at the shops. This made me play very aggressively, and it removed a lot of the strategy from the combat of the game that could have made some fights a lot more interesting. You can also find and buy various upgrades like health and weapons. But this leads me to my last major complaint. You can very easily get the best armor in the game extremely early, and if this happens, the game is a complete cakewalk. By using this armor, you don't take damage from many enemies in the game, and I believe that ruins the experience, so I suggest not using it if you do stumble upon it. Light Crusader looks and sounds great. The soundtrack has a very gothic tone to it, which is a perfect fit for the atmosphere, but sometimes goes for a very different tone depending on the scenario you're in. Animations are smooth, and some of the deaths in the game are pretty awesome looking. The game has a ton of fantastic bosses too. It's an experience in itself just to see every different boss. Treasure did a great job crafting the bosses, and it's one of the best parts of the game. Although Light Crusader has its share of flaws, it's a fantastic game like no other. The game sells for about $5, and I definitely suggest picking this one up. You won't regret it. This game has a lot of great parts that I intentionally didn't show because I didn't want to spoil too much, so make sure my efforts don't go to waste and at least give this game a try. Thanks for watching, and until next time.